My name is Professor Chris Alden. I'm the Director of LSE Ideas, a foreign policy research think tank based here, obviously, at the LSE. And so for many of you, you're familiar with that. Some of you aren't. It's been established, it was established in 2012. And one of the things that we do is try to engage academics with policymakers to speak to the knowledge that we have such that it can be applied to or brought into the policy discussions there. This represents the geoeconomics of climate change is a very good representation of the kind of thing we do. It's a project underwritten by Cato Stonix, and it is a project that has actively sought to answer some of the key questions of why geopolitics, geoeconomics come to get where the point of connection is with some of the key issues involving climate change. So this is one of a series, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Emanuele Giovannetti, who is the Professor of Economics at Anglia Ruskin University, Senior Fellow of Economics at Hughes Hall, University of Cambridge, so also close by, and has vice rapport for the study group on the International Telecommunications Union. He has a very distinguished and lengthy CV. I already have an agreement with him. I won't touch on every point, but just to bring you in the picture, he's done work on market power of the internet, mobile internet access, ICT platforms, hence the ITU contact, amongst other things, energy data spaces, digital divide, crowdfunding, and many other aspects of new technologies, and has been involved in advising governments in Europe, Asia, Africa. So again, very much that connection between the academic, the scholarship, and the policy communities. He's also held positions at he's widely published in this area, and he's held positions in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Cambridge. So with that brief form of that, I'm going to ask Dr. Giovannetti to speak to understanding the real digital economy and the troubling question as to whether it's clean or free. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Guido, has been organizing all my arrival here, and really extremely helpful. Again, my name is Emanuele Giovannetti. Emanuele is fine for questions. And I'm an economist, basically. So I know you're not economists necessarily. And the idea is to try, this talk is going to be is presenting some work that we're doing with other colleagues who are mainly energy economists and energy experts. Some of them is a group of colleagues. Is a Professor Jules Chamas at the Copenhagen Business School, who is a professor of energy economics, and Daniel David Arderius, who is actually working in energy with energy providers in Spain, but is also the University of Barcelona, Manuel Lorca, Copenhagen Business School, and Goldman Soros, who is now, after a PhD in energy economics, moved to work with the independent energy regulator in Canada. So this work is part of a wider project. It's a European Founder Horizon project, and it's called EDIC. The key is a project that involves many computer scientists, many energy technologists, many engineers, and our role is more as economists is to try to reflect and to think about what type of economic issues emerge from the problem that they tell us they are relevant problems. So again, it's a strange. The title is Economic Perspective on Granular Energy Data. And the subtitle is How Smart Meter Data Reshapes Incentives, Competitions and Policy in the Energy Sector. How does this relate with the theme of this series of talks? The key idea is that we think that there is an absolute need to look at the possible strategic intricacies and strategic effect that emerge when new technologies are adopted and implemented in the energy systems. There are too many ways to call them energy systems at the moment. They could be called energy sectors, energy data spaces. We don't want to get lost with terminology. So the key idea is that because of, we can see it here, this is sort of a context of this talk. Hopefully I will manage to start from the beginning and reach the end of the talk. The idea is that technology is clearly changing entirely the sector, okay? And what's technology? Clearly digital technologies. So a few years ago, it was unthinkable to have sub-meters in every single room that were able to monitor the consumption, room by room, appliance by appliance, having sensors that could, through 5G, communicate these different consumptions of different appliances to some sort of a central data space. And so basically providing large data on every user of energy, every user of electricity. And why now technology has provided us with these possibilities, and what is the immediate link with the green economy? Not so clean and not so free, fully agree with the overall theme. First of all, because we all know, this is not the objective of this talk, but we all know that data centers are extremely energy intensive. So we need data in order to integrate renewable energies into the system in a more efficient way, but at the same time, data centers are enormously energy intensive. So there are lots of a trade-off from that point of view. I'm not going to discuss those trade-offs, which are absolutely important. Free, even more so, because, again, this is just to anticipate one of the major themes that we're going to focus on. My perspective in reading, what the impact could be is of this datafication, if you want, of the energy spaces, is the impact on market power. And the impact on market power not necessarily for traditional powerful energy players, but also for big tech, for example. Because once we discuss these things in more details, but once we move from a more traditional energy to a database energy sector, it is possible that very large big tech might become able to provide a dominant role, because the key input at the end of all this entire production process becomes the personal data of the final users. Okay, so the Economist long ago titled on the first page, personal data are the new gold. Yes, in this case, personal data are the new gold, but let's see how would an economist think about the possible trade-offs and unexpected, unintended consequences that might derive from these aspects. Now, this could be the end of the talk, but basically, let me go back. This is the context. And so it's important for the first slide to say something, then we get to focus a little bit to what could be the policy implications. So this is a slide. I don't want to go into details of these slides, because somehow it just is a graph. It's a simplified, stylized representation of the energy system. We could spend hours describing the roles of all these different players. There are transmission service system operators, distribution system operators, market platform. The whole idea is that the energy sector is a network. It's a network industry, and it's becoming more and more complex and less hierarchical, less traditional. So historically, it was very simple. No? Energy was produced somewhere, usually from fossil fuels, and the generators would input this energy into some entry point into the grid. The grid will transport this energy to, probably everything was vertically integrated, to the final households, and the final household would pay for the bill. Okay? Maybe there were nationalized systems, then there were privatized monopolies, then there was a slow process of opening to competition segments that could be open to competition, But now, with the datafication of most of the energy choices and all the technological improvements, the network is becoming much more complex. So this is a very schematic representation, but we don't want to focus on that. The elements which are important probably are just the little two elements. There's, when I speak about smart meters and sub-meters, which are basically the units that are inside the buildings that actually are able to monitor your personal energy consumption. And the sub-smart meters, more interesting, are able to do this on a room-by-room, appliance basis, generating an enormous amount of information, and so also enormous amount of data. Another, I don't know whether you are familiar, have you heard the word prosumers before? Prosumer is this a new figure, new actor that has been, habilitated. They came out from the possibility of having digital access to the energy systems because they are consumers that, for example, have solar panels, and so they produce energy, and they produce energy through their own system, for example, solar panels on the roof, but at the same time they are consumers, and they are able, sometimes, if they are able to resell the surplus energy that they produce into the grid, and so they are at the same time producers and consumers, and as you can imagine, you can't really participate into the wide market as a prosumer yourself, but the fact that you can act as a prosumer means that your retailer, the company that provides you with energy, can develop very interesting contract for you. Like, for example, saying, okay, you can charge your electric car in the night with very, at a very low price. The battery stores that energy, you resell that energy during daytime at a much higher price. You don't have to do anything. There are all meters that can do this, and your car is parked there. And at the same time, during daytime, your solar panels, if you're not driving the car, are charging your car, and again, selling it at the moment in which the price goes up. Because one of the key issues of the energy is that kind of the intertemporal, variability. Everybody wants to use energy at peak time, nobody uses energy during the night, and so on and so forth. This creates lots of technical problems also for stability of the grid that technologies are always focusing on. So prosumers are the consumers and producers at the same time that of course face very interesting decisions and trade-offs, but of course also this role requires lots of knowledge, of cognitive skills, of competencies, so there could be lots of asymmetry in terms of, at the population level, who really has the skills to manage such complex strategies and profile and optimizations, and who is really going to benefit. Just to focus on one. And prosumers, we can only have them if the households have sub-smart meters, because we need to be able to measure exactly how much they are consuming at every moment in time. Okay. Anyhow, let's move on. If you have any question, please. I'm not going to be question at the end, but if you have any clarification question, anything, just please ask me. Okay. I'm happy to stop and to get lost in my reply. So. Energy transition and digitalization. I'll go a bit fast on this also, but the key idea is that very often energy policies, the official energy policies, focus very much only on the positive side of the introduction of data spaces for energy. We know that data space and digitalization of the energy system is essential for the integration of renewable energies. Why? Because renewable energies are much less controllable than traditional energies. So we're not really controlling when the sun is shining, when the wind is blowing, and so this could create a situation whereby there are excess inputs of renewable energies into the grid. You might have all read, in June, I think, in the summer, there's been a big blackout covering most of southern Europe, which was due to an excess input of renewable energy because there have been very strong sun, very strong wind, and so on and so forth. So much so that the grid structure collapsed because it was not well managed to take into account this possibility. It is very easy, much easier to switch on and off non-renewable energies. It is much more difficult to do with the renewable. Hence, if the supply temporal patterns of the renewable are much more complex to be managed, you understand that having access to digital technologies that allow demand to become flexible as well becomes almost an essential step to facilitate the integration of renewable energies and towards the green transition. So it is really, really important when you have, if you have a smart meter, like, for example, now in water, many households still pay a water tariff which is not based on the amount of water that you have been consuming. So installing a water meter in your household then will make your payment related to, this is very anti-economical if you think, no? So can you imagine with tariffs, energy tariffs, it would be very important to be able to provide you a tariff that might change throughout the day so that it gives economic incentives to the user to use it when when there is an abundance and the price is very low, and maybe to store it, and to store it to use a battery which has accumulated the energy before when the energy is very scarce and is very expensive. So I wanted only to say that it's an essential step, okay, the digitalization of the energy sector in order for the green transition. Also because the green transition goes through the electrifications of so many things which are not yet been electrified. Okay, we do need to change the stoves. We do need to, from gas stoves into electric stoves. We do need to move from cars to electric cars, and so on and so forth. Okay, if we want to it's not only electricity which is used as electricity which can be produced by, but it's just what is using electricity that can be changed. Anyhow, policies here say we need to do this, and we all agree that we need to do this. But do we have, and clearly we know that the digitalization of the economy, a bit late, has reached the energy sector. Has reached other sectors well before. I'm coming from the internet sector, so this is why my role was very much to try to think what have we learned from other sectors on economic trade-offs that emerge from the the necessity of sharing data, of integrating infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So it has reached the energy sector, and while clearly it is expected to increase the efficiency of the energy system, it needs also to reconceptualize the economics of the green energy transition. And the idea is what I have to do is a logical mapping. It says, these are the new things that technologies allows us to do now. What are the economics trade-offs that we might think could be relevant due to these new possibilities? So the steps of this mapping are these ones. We start from the technological enablers, which are smart meters, Internet of Things, devices, data platforms. They usually, all these tools, these digital machines, if you want, produce data, generate data, and once we need to generate data, the key issue to have a smooth communication within the system is the issue of interoperability. Now, this presentation is based on a paper which is a section on interoperability, and there's a lot of legislation at EU level also on interoperability. We are not going to discuss that a lot, but the principle is very clear. The idea that if we want to have competitive markets whereby a new entrant, an innovator, can come and steal the customers of a dominant player, it is very important that the data that the dominant player had about your own consumption would be, can smoothly go from the servers of one to the server of the other. We shouldn't have barriers to access the data, which are the data that you produce as a household, that will make it more difficult for you to change providers. In the UK, for example, there is a very important experience with the open banking regulation. It is meant to be extremely easy at a click of the mouse to change bank. Now, historically, you would say, you return to bank, you're finished. Because the bank is the person who would have written your reference letter, this person is a trusted consumer, and so on and so forth, has been with us for 35 years. Now you switch. You don't want to lose the capital that you've been constructing, and you don't want to lose the direct debit, all the forms, all the things, otherwise it's going to be impossible. So interoperability means the ability that your data could be readable by different, basically, operators in the same way, in a trusted way, in a secure way, and in an interoperable way. All these things generate information economic issues. And information economics focuses very much about what happens when we have asymmetric information about players. What happens, what is the impact when data becomes competitive assets, and what is the impact on market power. Economic implications from this means that the incentives can be completely transformed. The incentives of a dominant player, the incentive for an entrant, the incentive for demand, and also there could be higher entry barriers into the market. Just please ask me if I use terms that you're not familiar with. Like entry barriers are very, common in economics. We think is it easy or not to enter into a market and to compete against existing players. We want it to be easy. Because if it's not easy, then there is no competition, and then there is kind of a, more possibility from the existing players to extract more surplus from the consumers, monopolization, and the surplus extraction. And then also some possible consequences on policy and regulations. So what we want to try to do, the objective is to identify the new energy system actors who is coming as a country that did not exist before the digitalization of the sector, and discover what processes may reinforce competitive advantages of these actors. Okay, what are the kind of a typical processes that might reinforce tipping points, and so on and so forth. To do this, and to start this reflection, we start from the first observation, the digitalizations endogenizes consumers' demand. What does it mean this? It means that basically, when as a consumer you have the information, you are provided with all the information which is necessary for you to choose and move across alternative typologies of tariffs. So you could go on comparative sites, websites, and you can check not which one is cheaper than the other, which was the usual role that comparative websites were doing. You are able to choose which provider would offer what type of tariff, which is a dynamic tariff that changes, which is most suitable to your own lifestyle. If you like to sleep all day and work at night, or vice versa, you might have completely different. And these possible dynamic tariffs are possible to be implemented only because your data are read by machines, communicated to all of the possible competitors, and then are able to try to sell you what is really good for you. But of course, this would affect demand behavior, but also might require, might introduce discriminations in terms of the cognitive abilities or the skills or the digital skills of different families. The Commission for Climate Change done sort of, and then in the last report they created a classification, if I remember well, of 14 typologies of households. Some of them even had prepaid meters, so they can't decide anything. You just put the coins in your meter and you use electricity at the price you don't affect. All the households have lots of Internet of Things, sensors, abilities, timers, remote application that you can switch the air conditioning, the dehumidifier, the washing machine while you are coming back from work through a mobile app to create a real house. Clearly, there is a huge gap in how much the second typology of families can benefit from the digitalization of the system compared to the first typology of households, which has no power whatsoever in changing. You come back from work at 7 o'clock in the evening, and you awake for 3 hours, you cook and watch television, and that's it. So, let's, again, one of the key elements that have been transforming and digitalizing the sector has been the introduction of smart meters and sub-smart meters. because they really are the kind of the key interfaces between behavior and the data, which is then fed both to you and to the providers. CrowdFlex has been an experiment done with real people, not with simulations. One is the UK largest domestic flexibility study based on 25,000 households, and they try to provide households with incentives. So if you switch your consumption between this time frame and this other time frame, you will get these discounts in that. And they quantified that they measure the flexibility of demand of these households with a 15 to 17% demand reduction during the evening peak in response to specific incentives. Households which have electric vehicles were much more flexible because, of course, once you have an EV, you start also understanding better the cost of energy and how you can manage it and so on and so forth. Just to motivate that these are things which are quite actual and quite live. Smart meters, the fact that consumers are more flexible means that in economic terms, the elasticity, the price elasticity of demand changes. Now, I don't know, the price elasticity of demand in economics, in the first year of economics, is basically tells you what is the percentage change in your demand when the price goes up by 1%. Okay? So how much it goes down. It is a concept which is absolutely fundamental in economics, because basically, the more elastic you are, the less captured you are with your provider. Because what does it mean that you reduce your demand? Either you are able to change your pattern, or it means that you go somewhere else. You know, in the supermarkets, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and them, it's very easy to understand. When there is high elasticity of demand, it means everybody needs to buy food. And if one supermarket increases the prices by a given amount, you go to the neighboring supermarket. It's not too difficult to do so, okay? So we want to see, so the fact that this technology changed and affected the elasticity of demand means they also affect the definition of markets, the amount of market power, and many very important concepts which are used by regulatory authorities and competition authorities to describe the level of competitiveness of different markets. So, smart meter data enables the participations in the energy market because they also facilitate the process of switching providers. Again, you could have up and you can see exactly based on your consumptions what is best to be done, which one is the best, how much would you gain if you switch from one to the other. But at the same time, the fact that your provider is reading your data with a very granular level might give them some strategic incentives to change completely their behavior. So we know that economic operators like energy retailers are obviously profit motivated, and they will try to make the most of whatever technology is available and whatever information is available about the demand and the consumers that they have. So one possibility is that for sure much more economic surplus is created when there is this information about your temporary consumption, because you can really, when you are really able to price much less the consumption at a given moment in time, and you're able to shift your consumption across the cheapest time frame and time zones of the day, which could be related to the wind activity, to the solar activity, which could tell you what is your actual carbon footprint today if you put on the kettle now or if you put it on in 15 minutes. Because, this could be integrated with information. Oh, okay, 15 minutes, and now I have 5 minutes to finish. So let me try to go quickly on what am I then going to. This is still somehow in Russian, then I focus, but we don't need to look at the details. But I want to say that all of these issues based on data and the possibility of exploiting data become enormously more important due to AI. Because AI not only uses your data, but uses your data to create algorithms that learn from your data and improve the ability and the quality of the product that the sender is selling to you. And you might say, yes, that's fantastic, because I'm just going to be sold something which is best for me, plus the data mine, I can move it and take it to another provider. But AI usually does not necessarily use only your data, but uses your data in combination with all of your data. Merged data, synthetic data, and this you can port with yourself your own data, but you might lose lots of information and benefits when you want to change provider, because you lose all the intelligence that the AI, when adopted by the intelligence, is constructed based upon the comparison between your data and other data. That's just an aside. So now, what the remaining slides were, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but it is an analysis of a use case. So I took a very active and very innovative energy retailer in the UK, Octopus, which is actually a trans-European retailer, and started analyzing the type of smart tariff that they offer, and what do they ask you when you become a member, or when you want to switch to one of these intelligent tariffs. Now, again, we don't have much time to do all of this, but one of the first questions that they ask you when you want to join them is, when you want to move to a smart tariff based on smart meters, is, for example, this question: how would you like your readings to be stored? And they tell you half an hour, half hourly, daily, monthly, and you have the power to choose, okay? However, the moment in which you have made your choice, you are immediately told, in a very behavioral economics would call it as a form of nudging, that if you do it half hourly, you really have a chance to reduce your carbon footprint, okay? Because when you have a fine granular, when you provide your data at a fine granular level, they are able to provide a supply which more easily integrates renewable resources than if you just have flat data. Second, there is a part of punishment, of deterring statement. When you keep on doing on the website and reading the condition, it says, important, if you choose daily or monthly reporting, notice that your smart meter is taking the half-hourly data, okay? But if you want to communicate them coarser data, they get very angry. So basically said, just know that you will not be able to access half-hourly data through us. And so there is, again, some sort of push towards forcing your choices about giving them all the possible information. You know very well, whatever website you open, everything, you're never going to read all the things that you accept to do, how much of your data you're going to share. So what we're trying to do here, I'll go, these type of things have lots of anti-competitive effects. Okay, first of all, they can create a lot of, the fact that you can provide half-hourly data, it means that the supplier can give you almost like a perfectly shaped tariff, whereby you are priced less when you consume most, and so on and so forth. Okay, but this could create some form of brand loyalty, which is what the supplier wants to generate. It's an investment. Why do they spend into this intelligence data center? Because they want to capture you as a customers. But once they capture, if a new Octopus comes to the market with a new innovation, it will be much more difficult for you to switch to them. So this is, and when the dominant retailer knows this, of course he will charge you more, because he knows that you have some switching costs, that you are not, there is a perfect sort of in a perfect market where you switch, you always go for the lowest price given the same level of quality. I'll go quickly to this because I just have been then going along to all the different things that the contract is going to invite you to do. Okay, so they say they accept, for example, let me see, this is just still a concept. When you keep on accepting the contract, they tell you that in exchange for real-time meter information, the provider will make recommendations, possibly advertising and bundling energy services with additional types of services and commodities. Now, this is a tip, for example, a home electric vehicle charger, an air source or ground source heat pump, and so on and so forth. So they can also offer you free or discount or even zero energy prices, which is going to be when there's excess energy, sometimes providers have to pay negative prices in order to access to the grid because there's congestion. So for them it's even convenient. But for you, you know that when it is possible for you to be offered these things, then it's really extremely difficult, and it is really difficult, again, for competitors to be able to, for a lot of strategic effects, which are typical of platform markets and two-sided markets, where zero prices are usually used to entice one side of the market so that you can overcharge the other side of the market. You know, where you get a free newspapers in London, no? And I almost appealing, but I still saw them here at the tube station. You get them because the paper costs ink, people, writers, paper, and everything. But the advertisers are paying more because you get it for free. And so there's a larger audience. And similar effects can take, the two-sided market effects can take place on these markets. Am I at 1 minute probably? Okay. So the content continues, really I think very interestingly, with many other clauses and clauses and clauses about cookies and tracking device. And they say, what are you allowing us to do by tracking your usage and information? And you can see that by tracking you, the company tells you, we are going to do advertising products for you. That we are going to merge the data, we are going to provide you with tailoring of tariffs and offers specifically tailored to your own personality that we are now coming to know perfectly well because we know everything about when you wake up, when you put on the kettle, when you're this and this. If one day you don't wake up, they would know it and say something has changed, maybe it's sad, maybe it's depressed, we need to change something, and then they can send you immediately a note about something going on holidays and so forth. But I'm not joking, unfortunately, and all these things are all things that would increase enormously the switching cost, which is the ultimate powers of consumers to be able to choose among competing providers in the market economy. Again, many other strategies always go, they are allowed to do market segmentation, they are allowed to do all things which are ultimately very bad for competition. Okay? So we all know it's extremely good and important to have granular economic data for them to provide efficient integration of renewable resources. But the economic power and strategic incentives to adopt economic strategies that might really, win over the competition and capture you forever, I'm simplifying them, I'm rushing a little bit now, can be quite worrying. Okay, so I would probably go to the last slide here, in which we probably only say thank you. Okay, but here, again, reflecting on, we already said that the data is not just your personal data, but can be derived and merged data, so there are many relations. Another worry which is quite important is what I was saying at the beginning, is the fact that your data can be shared across different industries, okay? And so they can provide complementary products which have nothing to do with energy, which is again the general company, or it could be your Google Maps or any provider that based on something will learn something and is able to provide additional service in other. So there could be leverage of market power across different industries that before that were completely separated. So for national regulatory authorities, competition authorities, antitrust authorities, it is becoming infinitely more difficult to try to understand what is really, is there a risk for competition? Is there a risk of monopolization? There are so many issues that need to be, and this is why it is very important, first of all, to try to analyze the contracts and see what are the incentives that the contracts provide to the players and what are the guarantees for consumers to try to defend themselves against this. Then to do market studies like the crowd flex that I was mentioning before, to try to estimate, to get an idea about what is really the flexibility, the responsiveness of the final consumers. And I think at this stage, I've stolen too much of your time. My smart meter has probably gone off. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Why don't we make a few comments and we can sit down and have a kind of conversation between ourselves and the audience. So the vision I get from what you've said is one that the digital economy is not only no longer free. I think an aspect that you didn't speak as much about, but the sort of supply side and the resources, critical minerals, and that kind of component of it. But in addition, if you please have a seat. But in addition to that, it's also something. It has costs in terms of our own as consumers. The unregulated regime, the market-driven choices of these. The companies and the like. I don't know if you're familiar with Black Mirror. I felt I was hearing about one of these episodes of Black Mirror where things get sort of darker and darker in this way. So in that sense, it provides a vision which is quite both personal and somewhat troubling, shall we say. So I wanted to just throw one question out there. Is there a regulatory regime that has that can address this kind of question? If the digital economy has this shape, what is the role of government in this kind of setting, or states, or in terms of firms and what have you?
Thank you. I would like, first of all, I love Black Mirror. I don't know if you've seen it, but it is really, really dark, and it actually is becoming more, real on a daily basis. Let's focus on the regulation and the regulatory aspects. There is definitely a very important debate. At the EU level, there is that act, which is the Digital Act, which has been very, very, very relevant. And for example, that act has been identifying some players as gatekeepers. So it provides you with the criteria for identifying within these information networks some players which are so much more powerful in terms of the real network presence that they need to give access to their digital infrastructures, for example, to smaller players in a fair way. The implementation of these things are really, really difficult. But what do we have? What is the interesting question relating also to the nature of your course and your experience, the international dimension? As soon as we know that energy is very local. It's local in itself, originally, There are, in the UK, for example, most of the renewable energy is produced in Scotland, because there's lots of wind, and where also lots of oil was coming, the North Sea oil was coming from, but it's mainly consumed here in London. So, and this creates imbalances. So there is definitely a geographical, local aspect to that. But there are also lots of international connectivity issues that make it international, most of all when we move to the data aspect of this. So when I was mentioning big data companies entering into energy market, finding themselves a specific role, as there are many different technological term aggregators, but they might purchase energy company, but they basically are able to make much better use of the data than the traditional energy company, because they come from the IT sector. They've been used, they have the model, they have the, like for example, the large language models to analyze those data that the local energy provider wouldn't be able to really analyze. So when we go on to these international aspects, the regulatory limitations are enormous, because national regulatory authorities are unable to do, as we all know too well, are really very limited and very constrained when the players are global players. Also because it's very difficult, as we know, to understand where is Meta located, where is Google located. Is it really in the Cayman Islands, where all the revenues are shifted, because it's very easy through internal accountancy procedures to show that most of the value added is in the Virgin Islands or wherever it is. So it becomes very difficult. And in my experience, I'm working at this as a study group of the International Telecommunication Union, which is the UN agency for ICTs. So the issue is that it would be really, really important for these issues to be discussed at international levels. Just think that at the moment, the digital connectivity in Africa is one of the biggest problems in terms of the proportion of people who don't have a connection to the internet. What is actually happening in these months? Starlink, owned by one company, that you all know about, is now providing internet access, underpricing the cheapest possible local internet service provider in most African countries. Now, some people say, look how good we are. We are giving free internet to everybody, people who never had it. And of course, we shouldn't ignore the fact that it's very important to have cheaper internet access. But we should also worry about the fact that if all internet access in all African countries is all local ISPs go out of business and become replaced by one single provider located in one country with no pays taxes, but in another country, in many other countries, that becomes problematic. So that becomes an issue of international governance, I would say. Because what happens, once all the local ISPs, internet service providers, have gone out of business, then the company which was undercutting them is free to re-raise the price because it becomes their own. So this is why the international dimension is absolutely essential and critical. There are lots of also international problems within the EU, which has a unified framework and regulatory structure. There are enormous problems of different level of compliance in the different countries and lack of interoperability. The entire effort of our project is the construction of a joint, of a shared data space whereby a Spanish electricity provider might be able to read the energy consumption from this smart meter of an Austrian household and somehow intervene, and in some part of the value chain in helping providing, maybe access to renewable energy somehow through a chain of things where it is most needed. But the clear issue of integration of renewable energy and success in the grid transitions, of course, is the fact that there is geographically, if we were just one big bathtub would be fine, but there'd be lots of areas in Europe where there'd be at the same moment in time an excess supply and at the same time an excess demand for renewable energies in different localities, exactly because of the different degree of solar intensity, or wind, but with a statistical regularity, okay? So the more we can integrate the flexibility and the knowledge of the needs and the mapping, the better we can use existing resources. So it's very much international coordination, but also regulation, because the moment you get the flexibility of knowledge, information, data, you also give more power to those who really are able to govern.
Questions? I'm going to add further, but I want to open it up to the audience. Please, if you could identify yourself. I know who you are, Robert, obviously.
Robert Faulkner from International Relations. So I get the message that we need smart metering to bring down our energy consumption. That's part of our decarbonisation efforts in the energy system. But in the UK, we're doing this mostly by incentivizing people or encouraging them. It's a voluntary measure to install a smart meter, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have one. I rarely look at it, I must confess. So I feel like I need to go home quickly and check where it is. It's somewhere. I just have a very simple question. If we have a net zero target in the UK, which we do, and everyone's going to be obliged by 2050 to get to net zero, more or less, wouldn't it be easier for the government to mandate the complete digitization of the network, both on the consumer and the producer side? How is it that we're still talking about nudges and incentivization and so on?
This is also the key issue. I think in order to moving towards net zero, smart metering is absolutely essential. Okay, I was only focusing on the negative aspects because as an economist, we always want to look at the bad side of the nice thing. But the preamble is that yes, they are absolutely essential. And you're absolutely right, there are different experiences at different national levels. I think in Spain, for example, they are free and they are, I don't know if they are mandated, but probably the retailers, the mandatory aspect is for the retailers to provide households with it, because you don't want to force each household to purchase, whatever it is the cost. Could be £100, could be 50 of the smart meters. Then there is, of course, competition in the smart meters market. I think in the UK there is the Hive, which is a typical box that tells you, and you can have a visual representation of how is your consumption daily, weekly, changing depending on when you switch on an appliance, it changes. So mandating, I think is essential to extend adoption. What is the best way to extend the diffusion, to saturate the households with the diffusion? There is a usual debate, who is going to pay for the final price? Is it through general taxation? It is by the users, because if we think about users, who would have the stronger incentive to have smart meters? those who probably spend the most, or in the most inefficient way, the electricity consumption. And those are usually, could be also a category. This is why I was mentioning the 14 categories of households. When you have a very wealthy household, which has a very expensive electric cars, a battery at home, all these IoT things, there is the strongest incentive to do this. You just gain money by having a smart meters. And smart meters in every the substance smart metering. Very much poorer households don't have. It would be first of all expensive to be mandated to do, and probably they might have less incentive to. So, but that is absolutely essential. So the government should decide who is going to pay. Is it the government to generate taxation? Is it an energy tax? The risk is sometimes that renewable energies are paying taxes in order to incentivize other things. So they're paying more than what the actual cost would be in order to incentivize. The government is introducing and deleting and reintroducing, for example, incentives for electric vehicles. They changed again policies recently, no? They've reintroduced something that they did recently. So that's a more sort of a macro fiscal policy point of view. Who is going to pay? I agree with you fully that there should be every new construction should be, and there is a regulatory aspect, but for existing construction. What about the rental market? Is it the owner of the house that should not be able? So now, in theory, you need to have an energy certificate, no, to rent your house. Should you be mandated to have meters? And you stop at meters or smart meters, or you go to sub-meters? And also, at the end of the day, what is also important is also electrification. So transition from gas stoves to induction stoves. Transition from boilers to heat pumps. What type? So I think it's a very difficult puzzle. But it needs to be. I believe that because there are so many elements of public goods into this and so many social externalities, we went very fast across one of the slides that was mentioning that these smart meters help aligning individual incentives with social incentive, with social goods. So that's a typical argument that economists always love to think about. No? If we just only leave it to individual behavior, it's not a perfectly competitive market with no fixed cost. It's full of externalities. It's full of public good nature. So definitely there is a very strong need for public, at least coordination, at which level is a very difficult question to answer.
Thank you. Other questions in the audience? Yeah.
Just following up a bit on that. Hi, I'm Bruno. I did a PhD here, and now I work at a climate think tank. So following up on that, it seems in the long run, every consumer would benefit from this. In the sort of intermediate, we have to make significant investments to the grid to manage this flexibility, which we will have to pay for, right? And I think you mentioned the case of Spain, where apparently the blackout was caused by a lack of flexibility in the grid, and the grid wasn't ready to manage that variability you mentioned. So we have to pay for that. But it seems to me that the risk is a sort of two-tiered energy system in which you have relatively wealthy, well-informed prosumers with smart meters who can decide to put the kettle on and who can sell electricity to the grid, etc. And then you have poor people, or poorer people. I know you have 14 categories, but it's like it seems to be converging into
three. In fact, they grouped them into three in the report, in the Climate Change Commission report. The 14 went into three.
And you have people who would still need perhaps to pay for some of the grid upgrades, etc., but wouldn't see any benefits, and perhaps who would be more susceptible, going to the politics of this, to the arguments that, see, we're paying more in our electricity bills to pay for these hippies who have smart meters and who decide when to put the kettle on. So how can we sell this? Of course, that's more my job than yours, but how can we sell this in a more compelling way to a wider
Look, I think this is an absolutely essential question. Also from a political point of view, again, I'm not, probably you are more political, but it's very easy to attack net zero policies if you want, because you say they are just benefiting the people who are able to really make those choices because they are wealthier, but also because of their digital skills and the competence, the time to think about these issues. Mm-hmm. You were saying you don't look at the smart meter. I have been working on this project, and I get bored to look at I realized that my PVs, solar panels, were dead since 21st of August because I got the bill, which was much higher, but I didn't look at my house. So he said, absolutely, the attention span, attention span is money in a way, and it requires skills, and it's very scarce. I fully agree with you that that is a key issue, that the social impact, the asymmetrics of impact, the risk that this creates different effects, which are worse, economically worse for the less well-off. Okay, so this is why I think it is important maybe to learn from something where I'm more familiar with, which is, for example, the telecommunication industry. It had very similar issues. To bring a telephone line in Scotland was enormous. No private company would have an interest. Or to invest in internet in Africa, it's the same thing. No, you don't go with cables across jungle and forests with civil wars and things to get 3 customers that use little data and they can't pay much because their income are like this. So country by country, usually the idea historically has been to have these universal service funds, whereby telephone providers, where they were making most of the profits in areas like London, where with one cable you can link on this building, were then able to pay a proportions of I think their specific formulas, I think of the revenues or something, towards the universal service obligation, which would be global fund, which is dedicated to extend the network where it's not profitable. Other possibilities that are studied very much again in the camp, but it's very similar because when you want to extend the network, the grid is similar like with the internet infrastructure, is the idea of having multiple competitors cooperating and sharing an infrastructure investment. So it is not profitable for only Vodafone Africa to build a network that goes between Burundi and Rwanda, but it might become possible when there are the 3 key providers, MTN, Vodafone Africa, and everything, to co-fund this with additional support. And to use, then the problem becomes one of governance of shared infrastructure. So because there's some common cost that prevent usually to make it profitable for one player, but if shared, they could be viable, sustainable for a multiplicity of players that usually are competing against each other. So that's a key governance issue, is how do you create some governance structure which needs to be monitored by national, so for example in the field of telecommunication, the National Regulatory Authority usually produce some, they're called reference interconnection charges. I'm building this, I'm allowing you to come to my network, exploit my investment to serve customers, to steal customers from me if you are more efficient, for example, but I can charge you according to a cost-based formula. Then there's enormous debate, what are those costs? What should be reflected? But if I just, then we can pool more resources in this way, but to ensure that there's a fairness of interconnection charges among companies which are at the same time competing against each other for the same pool of consumers, this is the main. So I think learning from other industries which have gone through similar things in the past decade would be very important. To send a political message and never to punish and never to let the people who are less well off pay. The problem the general taxation is a more complicated thing, because in theory, who is paying the largest part of general taxation? University fees are related in some way, no? When they were entirely paid by general taxation, university is free, but they was paid through general taxation. So maybe people who are not going to university were paying for the university fees, or people who were going to university maybe more from more privileged background. So it's complicated, I would say, but it's essential to think about it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience?
Thank you, Amelia from the Foreign Office. Really interesting to hear your reflections about the kind of like international governance side, but it'd be interesting to hear how you see this working in kind of a non-market economy situation, and also I think thinking about it from a more geopolitical level, China's kind of gaining all the influence from becoming this like electro state. I just wondered if you have any reflections on like how involved they are with the integration of renewable energy places they're exporting to, and also any reflections on how that will kind of grow China's influence, because I feel we've been talking about Western scenarios. It'd be interesting to see.
Thank you. I think that China is, this is very a splendid example of how different players may become players within the UK energy sectors that were unable to play any role in the energy sector because of the digitalization. So China would have never been able to, they import oil, they import things, they could play a role with the shipping companies and everything, but they wouldn't interact with our supplies of traditional, and they wouldn't be able, but they entered into the renewable energy first of all because the solar panel production, which is, they have enormous economies of scales, so they are completely outcompeting. I think the number of solar panel companies in the western part of the world, I call it, are going bust because they cannot compete with a very, very low cost, which is so good that China has very low fixed cost to produce solar panels. We have to consider all the possible interaction and consequences. So, as an economist, I guess it's important to have specializations, and it's important that things might be produced where they can be produced in a more efficient way, in a pure, neutral world. Then, what is the degree of intelligence or data intelligence? So solar panels might be pieces of silicon, silica and everything. But what is the intelligence that goes into that? What are the machines that gather the data from your solar panel and the interfacing of your own house with your solar panel? If those data, that intelligence, is merged by, is used by a company which is, in your case, if I mention like a Chinese company, could be Huawei, could be something. If it is merged, it's now, I was saying TikTok, but now TikTok is changed. It's become complicated in these days. No, it seems it's been just very recently the ownership of TikTok is more complex. But again, the Huawei issue was very important. So many digitalization elements, from security cameras and so many to the 5G networks in the UK. There's been a very important debate about the most efficient and cost-effective elements for the construction of the 5G infrastructure was a Huawei one, but that was clearly posing some concerns, if you want. Now, those are more geopolitical one, and I'm always focusing on the market one. What will be the owner of those data be able to do, capturing you and preventing you from switching to a competitor? But the geopolitical dimension is essential, because what would the owner of the data do if that owner might have hostile interest, might have a likelihood of developing hostile interest in a possible scenario in the future against one country. So again, the issue of data transparency, data accountability, data trusting is essential. And then again, I think the debate within the EU with this different data space project is very much because they do feel and perceive that they are somehow still, before any sort of explosion, a sort of a semi-coherent sort of a group of countries, whereby I think data could be shared in a federated way with some external walls and trust and procedures. But it is very difficult. If you think like the GDPR legislation has been creating lots of issues with exchange of data with the US, for example, no? Because I think that with a different type of GDPR legislation within the US, then data flows that pass via the US might be infringing, and so it becomes is a dimension which is becoming completely crucial. The digitalizations of the data, electric data, and electric data tell you everything about your life in a way, because really so much of your life profile can be, once you know exactly everything about your commuting pattern, your average kilometer and distance with your electric vehicles, your cooking patterns, your your smartwatch is telling you. You know what? I got a nice message just before coming here. I was having a pizza nearby, and he said, "You are too stressed now. take a break, relax, do some breathing exercises." I wasn't feeling stressed at all. I took a picture because, okay, some data is telling me that I'm too stressed, and somebody, and this data is probably communicated to somebody who's probably going to advertise next time I go browsing on the website, go and take a relaxing holiday or go to a yoga class and everything. So it is interesting.
Chilling.
Black mirror.
I know. Anyone else? We have a little bit of time here. Any other questions? Good. Can I ask then, if we're coming back to China, has this is it the most extended example as regards to granular data collection applied to not even nudging really, if you say, but just sort of really setting disciplining in some way how one's conduct one way or the other? Is that how you would read it? That's where we really are going, maybe in our own form with this adaptation?
I hope that the key issue, I think there is in, let's say, in Europe, the UK, legislation are very aligned, regulation are very aligned. There's a very strong emphasis on the principle that you own your own data. So you have access to your own data. You have the right to get your own data, unless you give it out. You know, when you're signing tracking cookies,
they're always
there, no? But there is a principle that, and the principle of living, voice, exit, the idea of exiting a given thing, and that should be the key principle. My fear, just to be more pessimistic, just to veer into more kind of some pessimistic, is that the key issue is that because data are amalgamated, and just the true intelligence of the big operator comes from the amalgamations of the data, taking out my data means nothing. So I can do much more, sadly, when I put my data into Google Drive directions that merges those data that not allowed to come from some pancreas to here walking, and incorporates the observations of another million walkers that found roadworks here and this and this and that. Then if I move, I said, I hate Google, I hate Meta, I want a local cooperative data association that has local knowledge and produces the same things, non-for-profit. And I have the freedom to take my data to something similar, but the final product I get risks being much less, of a much lesser quality, because it's based only on my data and on a small subset of data, then the power that comes from amalgamating. So the key process are the self-reinforcing tipping processes that economists always worry about, that create players that accumulate an enormous amount of market power, because what they can offer to you, there are so many increasing return to scale to this, so many externalities. Getting you as a customer brings benefits to all the other customers. In the old telephone world, there was the famous network externalities. The more people have a phone line, the happier you are to have a phone, the more willing you are to pay for a phone line, because you can phone all those people. Imagine how boring to phone 50 people. You don't really do it now. At a certain point, they stop these externalities. Now, once you have 50 people connected, you're not going to want to phone more than 50 people. Now, with this data, this never stops, because if the information for how to go from here to St. Pancras to walk is based on information of 1 million people, I'm not speaking to those 1 million people. It's the algorithm that uses those 1 million people data provides a better product for me, which in itself is good, but it's worrying if that algorithm becomes only owned by one company, which is unaccountable, not transparent, we don't know where it is located, where it pays taxes, or where it doesn't pay taxes. So from that point of view, I think the interoperability, which was the concept that it's very, very important. But it's very difficult because it's very easy in principle to say every system should be perfectly interoperable. It's been fantastic how the banking, open banking regulation has been, it's working. There are nudging behavioral issues they've been studying. For example, people switch providers for insurances, for example, because insurances you get a reminder every year when it expires. You get a reminder. You know your car insurance is expiring. At that point, you go and you switch and you go compare whatever and you do it. With other sectors where there is a natural end time of a product, or where there is a compulsory, like there is much less switching activity. So there are lots of a framing effect of how you regulate what happens when your contract actually expires with a provider. How are you really going to think? So I don't think like with a bank account, it doesn't really, it's not that every year HSBC is telling me, you've been with us for 1 year, now you're free to choose whatever you want. No, it's something that you never have the mental time or the bother to do and change, unless you find something which is really extremely appealing. And the famous household which has no time to work, to think about it, will not funding, so they pay much more for banking services than using a more fintech type of alternative, which could be much easier to be used and cheaper. And
Well, on that note, I think what I've taken away from this one is, well, I should add an anecdote. I do have, in the household, we have a smart meter. And the main effect was absolute panic throughout the household. Anytime the meter like inched up just a little bit, and the children ran around, well, we have to turn these off, or look how much money is gone, this stuff. So it had an odd social effect within the household. The other thing is the sense that the digital and net zero economy and all of these sort of factors have to be understood as, and in terms of the costs they have, as social costs as well as social gains. And I've emphasized maybe negative comments, but you've also emphasized the positive side of that, achieving those gains in a rapid fashion. So I think it is intriguing and contains elements that also are disturbing. In any case, you can tell I'm analog. I'm sitting here writing down papers, so I'm probably immune to some of this stuff. But anyway, thank you very much.
thank you so much.